All right, I'm going to ask the next question. So this is for the panelists. Do you think solidarity between migrants and Indigenous folks is relevant, and why or why not?
I'm going to say, hell yeah, of course, particularly as Filipinos and as Canadians, as settlers of color in any country where Indigenous populations have been harmed, which is a lot of them. I think what's important about this question is there's a concept of decolonizing borders and understanding that the concept of borders and the concept of like illegality, they're modern tools of colonization, and the whole concept of borders to begin with is an imperialist concept. It's about fostering exclusivity, and it's about hoarding resources and removing people from land. So the interesting thing about migrants and Indigenous people is that to the colonizer, Indigenous people represent the land and the resources that are so precious. Migrant workers represent the labor force. And so there's exploitation happening on both ends, which I think binds us. There's a relationship there based on compassion, right? Another thing that I was thinking about is that migrant workers and the indigenous communities both understand what a disruption, a cultural disruption at the hands of a colonizer means. 60 scoop, residential schools, foreign workers. There is a disruption of culture happening. There's a removal of language that happens on both ends. And I think that in that basic knowledge, solidarity exists in a very human way, in a just understanding that these human experiences are both painful, and they're not the same, but there are parallels, and the pain is real. The resilience is real, and I feel like that there's the experience of being a diasporic person really calls upon a humanity that is required. The removal from land for whatever reason really brings to the forefront this idea that this is a shared experience of a lot of humans on this planet, and I really think that there's an essentialism that can happen when we realize that we all do have shared experiences, and we can all grow from that, and we can all lean on each other, believe each other, and attempt to understand each other in a way that produces forward-thinking movements that help us all.
Thank you, Marisa.
I can go next. I think solidarity between Indigenous folks and migrant folks is really important, because I think there needs to be always that recognition that we are on stolen land, And I think if not, there is a certain complicity in this ongoing settler colonialism if we aren't aware of our role in the perpetuation of that system and the ways in which we also benefit from that system. And I say this quite seriously as someone who works within the federal government and has gone into Indigenous communities representing the federal government and being very much complicit in the development of policies that have to do with Indigenous lives, you know what I mean? There has to be that constant kind of recognition that if I'm not moving in this space and spirit of solidarity, then I might actually be part of the problem. And I still struggle with how to navigate that as a federal kind of representative. I do, it's difficult. I think that working within the government is important. I think that there is change that can be made through working within that system, but I also have to be really conscious and cognizant of the ways in which there is complicity. And I think an understanding of that responsibility towards another group, that understanding of that solidarity that's not only based on shared oppression, but a kind of recognition of the humanity of each and every individual person, right? And a kind of like very much this care and this love is what is capable, hopefully, of holding me accountable and making sure that and hopefully everyone, this is not something that is, that's going to be really just for migrant folks in terms of Black or Filipino, but really everyone. There needs to be that shared solidarity between everyone and Indigenous folks on Turtle Island, because it is all our responsibility to make sure that we are actively working against that ongoing colonialism. And I don't know what that looks like when you're working in government, right? There's a lot there to kind of dig through and try and understand, but I think it's so necessary. So I'll just stop at that, because it's something that's a bit of an ongoing struggle of what that means when you're in certain positions.
I want to sort of add, I've never been to Canada, full disclosure. So I can't speak to the immigration experience, the migrant experience in Canada. My perspective is very much informed by the fact that I was, Filipino, watching loved ones and relatives leave every year. We were the ones getting left behind and being told that what was where we were told that our position and our place in the world, wasn't the right position, the right place. I grew up with my cousins, my relatives who left, looking at us pityingly as the people who were left behind in Manila, those who weren't getting, a good enough education. We were being sent hand-me-down clothes from cousins who were younger than us, and we would fight over, all these things that smelled like America, and we were so excited about it. So that's the perspective where I'm coming from, and that's I guess a very difficult perspective, because that I think it doesn't really get talked about when migration is talked about. You don't really, when people talk about diaspora cultures, people don't talk about what it's like for family that's left behind. The narratives are often navigating what the new environment is, what the new country is, what the experience is, and how you preserve your culture in that other environment. There's definitely more talked about narratives when we're talking about diaspora and we're talking about migration, but you don't really start to understand. You don't really get a lot of stories about what it's like to be the one left behind, to be the one witnessing the brain drain from your own country, to be almost angry at those who left, and to be angry at the opportunities that that are afforded them that aren't afforded you, to internalize their racism that they're experiencing there when they come home, and then they treat you as somebody lower because you don't have a green card, you're not from America, you speak a different kind of English, why are you using those words? And this is what you need to sort of have in the world, to be a real person, to be a person that's legitimate and valid. You can't be from the global south. So that's sort of always been the perspective that I've had when migration is concerned. Now I have a very different perspective now as an adult because I married a person who was an immigrant. He was an anchor baby in the US. And my friends now are, they came back to the Philippines, and my role has changed a lot to translating my culture to them, to sort of helping each other navigate that and translating and exchanging that. So in that way, that's sort of like a different kind of solidarity. And I talk about this with Andy a lot, where I was telling her, the Filipino diaspora, that is very much a Filipino identity. Like just because my friends, let's say, don't speak the language anymore, I don't think that removes Filipino-ness from them, because I think back home there's a lot of tension when it comes to that. There's a lot of tension between you're so westernized, you're really Filipino, all of that. Those conversations happen back in the Philippines, and it's a really tough one to navigate. But what I've learned from having all of these exchanges, and also from sort of becoming sort of like a translator from the Philippines, is that we've only gotten to a better place by having those exchanges, by recognizing each experience as part of our history, part of our people's history, and not deleting those narratives as more Filipino or less Filipino, more Americanized or less Americanized. It's just really getting to see the truth, and really getting to really highlight those narratives as important perspectives. One of the things that I think that's been interesting, at least from my industry of photography, historically photography has always been the domain of the white man. The first photography that I ever looked at was photography. The first photography that I ever looked at when I looked at my own history was photography taken by men who would have seen me as savage had I lived in their time. And that was sort of like the internalized view that I had of myself. But what's happening now in photography is that more and more people are encouraged to share their own stories. But one of the things that I always advocate for, and that I always challenge in our industry, is why are you asking, brown and black photographers to only cover our own communities? Why not assign, someone from the global south to cover a story from another country that isn't theirs? How come when we're doing foreign correspondence, it's always someone from the mainstream Western culture coming in to another place to interpret that? Why not do a cross interpretation coming from different perspectives? So, for me, I've always been proud that my own perspective has been informed by people who had a different, like my interpretation of America, my interpretation of Canada. What I know about Canada is informed by my family who migrated to Canada, and I only knew Canada from their stories from growing up there. And it's a very different Canada than what I see now as an adult in the news. And I think that there's so much nuance from having that perspective. That's a different perspective. And so for me, that kind of solidarity where we can sort of cross-pollinate across different experiences, across different hurts, across, different exchanges in what we've gone through, whether that's harm or pleasure. I think there's so much value in that. And I think that we're not talking about it yet. I think we're even in that place where, let people tell their own stories. And I think that that's annoying, because I'm just like, I want to explore other people's cultures. I like translating my own culture, but I want to go beyond, and I want to look at what it would be like to interpret other people's stories from a different perspective. So I think, the world that I imagine is one where we can only tell stories if we have solidarity.
Thank you, Hannah.